Hello, in this video you'll learn how to create a simple MCP server in .NET. In .NET 10, in this case, will be around sort of the same thing in .NET 11 as well. There might be a separate project for that. We still don't know. We are still in previous stages, but essentially it's just a simple console application in a way. A bit of perhaps an API kind of an arrangement, but essentially MCP, it's kind of like controller, but it's in a bit of a different structure, and of course a different protocol underneath and all that. But in general, you create a controller with certain descriptions, with certain arrangements for a bot to use. You might say that, right? So for essentially any LLM to use, so you might integrate that in your own custom arrangement. You might just hook it up to your Claude code or something like that. So you can do all kinds of things. So these are for LLMs to read, perhaps your custom chatbots to read, or perhaps your custom agents to read. So the general idea is still like an API, but not for humans, or rather not for sort of predefined systems, but for something else. Of course, you can just use a simple API, but this structure is more convenient, and you probably already know about this whole thing if you are in this video. Now, here we have this MCP Inspector. So this is how you can actually launch it and test it without having to hook it up to anything. So this is essentially Postman. So if you test an API with Postman, you test MCPs with MCP Inspector here. It's all default. It's all inside the code itself, inside the libraries, and we'll get through them. But this is where you can find everything, and we can list the tools available. They're called tools. So again, another comparison with APIs. If you have controllers, this would be like a route in the controller, the action in the controller. We have get weather, we have roll the dice. So if we run the tool, we can roll the dice, and it can do that. These are very basic examples, but let's get into the code. Let's see the libraries, the latest ones that we have, and let's look at the actual definitions, how you define this whole thing. So first, what we need is the ModelContextProtocol. This is sort of official kind of an arrangement in the whole .NET world. This is what we will be hopefully using from now on. One thing for all. There are, of course, if you watch the other video on this channel, how to run several providers for several LLMs with one single library. There is that one. It's kind of an interesting arrangement. You can essentially do the same exercise, but using different providers, not just different models, but different providers as well. So quite an interesting thing. But this is for ModelContextProtocol, the MCP. That's what it is. And this will be at some point a separate project. Now, will we use it? Who knows? But it is in the .NET 11 preview. If you want to download that, if you don't know how, take a look at the previous video, one of the previous videos on the channel. It's quite a straightforward process to do that. But hopefully it will be a project. Now, is it useful? Is it not? Remains to be seen. But the library, the NuGet library, is supported. It's fully supported. So this is what we need. And we don't exactly need HTTP extensions, but we will need some of the stuff because we're calling an API in the actual example. Now, the Program.cs setup, and again, this is not API, it's not web project. We start with console application in this case. Now, API, web API, whatever you want to call it, here, Razor page, it's even Blazor, it is also a console project when you begin with it, but obviously it gets modified quite a bit. But for this, you should start with console application, probably easier to do that. There are a few things here. We have add console for the logs. So those are the logs that will be when you run this little script. There is this script. You don't necessarily run this. You can, but you don't necessarily want to. you can run it, of course, as a console application. It will be usable, it will be available. But for the Explorer thing you saw in the beginning of the video, you'll need to use this particular command. So just paste that, and that will run it and will open it. Just make sure it matches the project name, because you need to match the project name. If you don't match it, it will actually start up, but you won't be able to connect, and it will be some weird non-error error in some ways. You can check the network messages, but that doesn't always help. Now, you have this is for logging. That's all there is. SDR, that must be there. The other thing is we builder services, we add MCP server, right? stdio server transport, we need to add that. And with tools for from assembly, so that we're actually using that library that we used. Other than that, again, there's no need for additional like controllers or things like that. It's completely separate thing. It's not like controllers or minimal APIs or anything like that. You don't even need that support, essentially. The only reason we have HttpClient is so we can use it to call that weather API as one of the examples. Otherwise, it's not needed for MCP Server. And we call it MCP Server, but really it's a program that does MCP. Can we actually call it MCP Server? Perhaps, but we don't call APIs a server. So something to consider as well in terms of the naming of this whole thing. It's essentially just a program. Where you host it, is it a Linux server, is it a Windows server, or whatever it is, it's up to you, right? Dockers and all those things all are available for this. It doesn't change anything. It's essentially still a .NET application. It just has a slightly different protocol arrangements than, say, Razor pages or APIs. So now let's get into the actual example just quickly. So for the arrangement of tools, you can have different classes, and that's a simple structure. Above your class, this one is tools.cs, so you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be tools for sure. But what defines it and what you will find in the actual Explorer, you have MCP Server Tool Type. Your attribute, you add that above the class, it will be registered and it will be discoverable in that Explorer that we launched previously, right? So it's all available now, and then we have some, again, if you're familiar with APIs and all that sort of stuff, action method, we can call it, right? And that's defined by yet another attribute. So very similar pattern, is sort of straightforward pattern in some ways, at least. We have MCP Server Tool Type. So this is MCP Server Tool Type with demo tools, and then this is MCP Server Tool, right? So this is the type, and this is the tool, and then we have some description. Now, description is quite important because that's what the LLM will actually pick up on. If it needs that tool, if it needs to roll dice, it will look for something that's rolling dice, right? So this is a bit of a tiny example and a bit of a useless one as well. But if there's no other tools available to roll dice, well, then that's what it will use, right? And you also want to provide a very clear description of the input. Number of dice to roll, very clear, very straightforward. Number of sides per die as well. Very important, right? Because we cannot assume that the dice, that the LLM perhaps or something else that's in between will know how many sides the dice has. Now, we obviously all know, right, that we have 6 sides on a dice. That's a normal thing, but perhaps a cheaper model won't be able to figure it out. So you always have to describe it quite clearly. and not too much as well. So something to consider when you're doing these arrangements. Now, of course, you can consult with AI of all this stuff. It's just about we're not trying to do a whole course about how you describe various tools and features and inputs in them, but in order to describe, you use description. So it's all about attributions, right? We have MCP tool, we have description for what the tool actually does, and then we have descriptions for the inputs. Very important. Now let's move on to the next one. Again, very similar, straightforward thing. And one sort of thing to mention when you're testing these, so this one reverses it. Essentially reverses text. Now, when you have something basic like this, you don't want to write a whole paragraph. So you say you wouldn't send as a piece of test handy for providing parameter, right? That's not the right way to do it. But you would actually send something like this. So now, you know, if it starts with 222 instead of 111, it's very visible that it was reversed. Of course, this example doesn't really matter. It's all going to be very easy, probably not even worth testing now. You should, but still. But there are cases where it gets more complex. When you're dealing with text like that, perhaps removing certain pieces of text. So you need to make sure, and rather than writing something real world, you should write something that's visible, right? So if you want to remove letters T from the whole thing, you write a bunch of AAA, BBB, TTT, and then you see that it gets removed. So just something to consider when testing these things, or actually anything in terms of API access and MCP access. It helps a lot not to get messed up with that many words, and it saves time as well. Now, a final one. Again, the same thing, it gets the weather. So if you ask for a weather to use this tool and you get to the weather, this one is a bit more complex, but essentially this is just like you would have in API, like you have in controller or minimal API arrangement, right? You inject the client factory, and this has nothing to do with the fact it's an MCP tool. Nothing at all to do with that. You just inject, and you can inject whatever service you want. It doesn't have to be necessarily HttpClient. It might be your own service. So you can inject them the same way that you would do with controllers, that you would do with minimal APIs. It works in exactly the same way. Now, again, if you want to learn more about, say, minimal APIs, take a look at some previous videos here on this channel, and we'll do a few more things as it relates to MCP and some other AI-ish arrangements in the future. Perhaps going forward with the .NET 11, there should be some interesting sort of arrangements going on there. Nothing will change too much, but perhaps something will change to a point where we don't have to think when there's next library coming, or when is the previous one becoming completely legacy and completely useless. So we're looking forward to that, and with that said, we will conclude this video.